So without further ado, let me welcome Elena Safariants. Okay, I got it right. Elena from the Healthcare Authority of the State of Washington, and our own Melody Kubo from the Office of Equality and Access to the Courts of the Hawaii Judiciary, who can also take some of the credit for Hawaii's judiciary being #1 in the country for access to LEPs. So if you could welcome them to the stage. Okay, why don't we start with healthcare, because we kind of came off of ACA discussion. We'll start with Elena.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you again. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you about our experience in Washington State. I have a short PowerPoint presentation on language access planning and implementation in Washington, and mostly lessons learned. So hopefully you can take home what not to do. Okay, now.
The right arrow, is that it?
Oops. So first and foremost, we needed to know our audience. Who are we talking about? Who are we serving? What needs they have? And for that matter, we needed to know person's language. Right away, we came with the issue of what does it mean? Written language or spoken language? Is it the same? Very often it's not. How do we differentiate between that? Do we call just for Chinese interpreter? And right away, people started asking, but which Chinese dialect do you need that interpreter to speak? So we realized, and on the other, like, how do you do it? First of all, to ask the right question. Sometimes you may see that there's a question about primary language. Unfortunately, it's not the best way to ask for the question, and we used to have it on our forms, what is your primary language? Well, ask me what is my primary language, and I, in all honesty, will have to say that it's Russian. Does it mean that I need an interpreter? No. Does it mean that I need written communication provided to me in translation? No. So now, between 3 agencies, DSHS, Department of Social and Health Services, Healthcare Authority, and Health Benefit Exchange, we use the same type of questions. We ask if the person can communicate in English, in spoken English. Well, guess what? Even populations who were born and raised here sometimes cannot do that. So for their written language, it would be English, but for their spoken language, it probably wouldn't be one, it would be sign language that they're using. And the other way around, it could be spoken language English, but for written communication, they would like to get their materials in Braille. So that just shows you how important it is to know. We just heard about the 15 languages that are assigned by feds for the state of Hawaii, and I don't know if you noticed, but I noticed it right away that there was Micronesian language. And we talked about it yesterday, that there's no such a language. It's a group of languages, so which one? And also Visayan language. It's again a group of languages, but which Visayan language do we need to get either an interpreter or translator in? Is it Ilocano? Is it Cebuano? So that's why we learned very quickly that it's important to ask the right question. It's important to create client's record with 2 languages, and we have it now for spoken and for written. We also need to know the literacy level of the person. We cannot assume that Somali woman is actually literate in Somali language. She may not be able to read it. Then we would be wasting taxpayers' money translating all the materials, sending those to her. So most likely we need to know that, probably send if it's automatic, letters in English, but follow up with the phone call. And with all our documents, we include what we call language insert. We have the little statement in 23 now languages telling people that if they cannot understand what is provided to them, that they can call our customer service center and they would get an interpreter online and explain to them what that mailing was about. And the last one is to use the correct language code on the how to do that. Just recently we went through the exercise of looking at what we call master language list. We provided to our prospective contractors, telling them that these are the languages that we are encountering in our state. It kind of comes close to 200 and more. But then we code them in the systems, and different systems code it differently. Some have a number, the others have 2-letter code. The third are using ISO 3-letter code. And all of those codes, when we are transferring data back and forth, have to come and equal the proper name of the language. So that was a huge undertaking that we just started a month ago, and we will be working. We have a plan of checking like progress in 30, 60, and 90 days. It's kind of a lean project, if you know what that is, but our governor is very, very strong on lean and Kaizen and, just fixing what bothers you. So that bothered us for quite some time, that we could not transfer the exact data or make systems read it to the point where it was the same language for the same client, even though it was coded differently in the systems. Oh, and also we need to ask best communication mode, either in writing or orally, and it's specifically for sign language users, because they use different types of sign language. It's not just American Sign Language. It could be Pidgin. It could be that the client is using tactile interpreting. So all of those kind of things needed to be in the client record and kept. And of course, you heard about the 4-factor analysis that talks about the number of proportion of the clients served and how often the contact occurs and how important that contact is. What we've learned from that, from those exercises, is that everything changes. When we started in our revised code of Washington, we have 5 languages named by name. That was in late 80s. That's how the demographics of the state looked. So we have the languages that we were required to provide services: Cambodian, Chinese, Laotian, Spanish, and Vietnamese. In the 90s, 2 languages were added, Korean and Russian. A little later, we inquired a large population of Somali clients, so we started supporting that one. Now we have Amharic, Arabic, Punjabi, Ukrainian, and very close for the next year coming, the language that we will be supporting is Burmese. Laotian population, however, shrunk, so they're nowhere neither at 5% nor at 1,000. We continue providing because it's in our statutes, and you know how difficult it is to change the state law, and some people just don't want to touch it with the mile pole because they're afraid to open can of worms, and then somebody will start saying, we're doing what? So we tried several times. Some people understand, some legislators understand, but it's not really on the front burner for them. We'll keep moving, but what helps is that we are providing services in any of the client's language, regardless of whether it's in the statutes or whether it's in the number, because I explained yesterday that we have automated systems that are issuing the letters to the clients, especially if it's a compilation of their benefits or notification of what they need to provide to continue their benefits, or the notification that their benefits are terminated or reduced. So and I explained that we have that pre-translated into the automated systems into 8 languages. All other languages or letters for the clients that are in other language groups get suppressed, printed in English, and sent completely through the different venue, which is specific translation contract for auto-generated notices or letters in non-supported languages. So any language that we inquire, we try to translate, and very rarely, less than 2% of the letters cannot be translated because translation vendors don't have the resources in that language. And even when that happens, we're watching for how often that happens, and we're asking the vendor to tell us what they're doing in terms of recruiting the linguists in the languages that they cannot originally provide translation in. So, and I'm saying that what we know is that there will never be one size fits all. It will never be perfect, but make sure that you don't stop trying. So we keep trying, and every challenge we see as an opportunity. So which type of language access services to use? Of course, we know that bilingual employees would be the best. We know that we can use interpreters, translators, or we can provide documents in alternate format. Each of those categories of language access assistance brings a rainbow of questions. So, where will bilingual employees be needed? At the front desk, or when they do the case management? What is the situation? In what languages? We can't have or hire bilingual employees in 160, 200 languages that we in Washington State encounter. For what purposes would we would be using them, and with what qualifications? Qualifications is very important, and as you all know, feds are not necessarily providing us with a very clear statement, what does it mean to be qualified? So we need to work, each state agency needs to make decision what it means for them. And when we will be talking later today about the creating multilingual workforce, we'll touch on that a little more. For interpreters, it's basically the same. With what qualifications, and who will be manage those interpreters? Even if it's a contract, who will be the contract manager or contract administrator? And how much to pay? How much to pay interpreters that they would be interested in coming and working with us? In Washington State, we had some groups of interpreters not very happy and even boycotting some of our programs. And we had to work through those challenges. I can see what's in yellow there. Oh yes, that was important for us too. Some of the language agencies were sued by IRS saying that interpreters that we believed were contractors were in fact the employees of those agencies. So then language agencies came to the state agencies, to us, and said, no, we cannot do what you ask us to do in the contract because it makes us an employer. Now in the state of Washington, interpreters actually united. That cleared a little bit for us, that situation. There is a better differentiation between contractor and employee, and I'll talk about it a little later. And again, a rainbow of questions for translators, the same. With what qualifications? What does it mean, quality and accuracy? Any one of you who did translation ever would understand that there are synonyms. Does it mean that if I use one and my counterpart translator use the other, that one of us is wrong. No, how can we agree on that? Who would be the third party deciding that? So accuracy is a very difficult component to actually assess. We have a document that we are telling reviewers what to pay attention to, and mark and explain. And then when the reviewer sends it back to the original translator, translator has the right to take a look at those and either agree and correct or provide the explanation why they believe that original translation is accurate. But of course, it takes time. For translators, consistency of terminology. Well, I can give you an example of when health benefit exchange came, and in English we had, this word exchange and marketplace and this and that. Translators were really lost. What are we talking about? We were trying to just get a person from the street who knows nothing about that English-speaking person with higher education, and they did not know what we meant in those documents. So we really had to make the English document clear to anybody and then send it for translation. And alternate formats when we need, again, who will produce that, how much to pay, what would be timeliness, urgency, and who will manage those type of services. So what did we do in Washington? We have bilingual employees. We tested them. We created specific tests. We will be talking about it in the afternoon. We have translation services, and originally they were handled in-house for at least 7 languages, and after several years, about 5 years, it became very clear that that team cannot handle all the translations. So we had to contract it out, but those linguists that were in then what was called Language Interpreter Services and Translation Office, they were reviewing the work. After less than a year, it became clear that that was overwhelming. Just can you imagine one Spanish person reviewing all the translations of the huge, huge agency that DSHS used to be? It became impossible. So that taught us to actually wrap the requirement for the original document to be translated into the contract, because we found that we were paying the vendor for translation. They were sending it to us. We were reviewing, making corrections, sending it back to us. Well, just tell me what kind of quality translation we started receiving when the vendor knew that we would be reviewing and correcting. So we paid twice. And we said, no, we cannot do that. So we created the stronger language in the contract, requiring 2 linguists of the same qualification. One translates, the other reviews. They can switch, but it had to be, to the best of their knowledge, the quality product that we were paying for. Interpreter services contracting out. Gosh, through 25 years, we went through so many systems, and we contracted with individual interpreters and then with language agencies. Some language agencies were wonderful and interpreters liked them. Others were just sending them into the field and reaping the, price off of them, and some were extremely unhappy. Then we decided to get brokers that provide transportation, somebody who would oversee, and especially on medical side, because in Washington State, we support our medical providers by offering them this free service. They can come and use our contract. We use state and Medicaid money to pay for that. So it's helping them to meet their requirement of providing meaningful communication. But there was no way to coordinate and find out and have an accountability of whether medical provider actually received this service, and for how long, because nobody was tracking that. Medical provider was not paying for it, so they just didn't care. And then language agency was billing us for whatever they thought they wanted, to bill us, but we couldn't have any records to compare. So eventually our legislation asked us to contract with one coordinating entity that has online scheduling system, and we implemented the gatekeeping, which is to make sure that medical providers are contracted medical providers, that the client that receives services is actually a Medicaid client eligible for Medicaid, and that the medical service provided is within the package, within the benefit package of that specific client. Because as you know, some benefit packages are covering everything, then they're dual eligible, Medicare, Medicaid. Something is not allowed to be paid under certain packages. So now we have this gatekeeping through one coordinating entity. Oh, God. So just to report on our successes, bilingual employees, as I said, telephone-based interpreter we're using, and we're using now NASPO, National Association of State Procurement Officers. That contract previously was just for WSCA, Western State Contracting Alliance, which was built actually on the telephone-based interpreter services contract created by the state of Washington. We have several translation contracts through the procurement office in our state, and we actually found out that translation of one document is not the same as translation of the other document. For example, under our contract, we have 5 categories. One is for forms, where the translated form has to have fields and boxes exactly at the same place where it is in English. It's one type of work that vendor has to perform. Make sure that whatever the text, in some languages it expands, but make sure that it still appears in the same places as an English original. Then there are publications, they have a lot of graphics, pictures, whatnot, and that actually requires desktop publishing, and it cannot be included in all-inclusive per word rate, so it's a separate category. Then auto-generated materials, general communication materials, and the 5th one is client-specific materials. So we have 5 different categories, and we have specifications for each of them for our vendors to work in. We require translation memory software, and this way our vendors are helping us to save some money. They do not charge us for the text or for the paragraphs, or sometimes even for the whole pages that they have translated previously. For example, statutes, based on what the decision is made, those statutes are always the same. Once translated, they just put it there and they don't charge us for that. We again are trying to be diligent with how we spend resources. And we have a comprehensive web-based translations tracking system which keeps all the work for almost 12 years now, 12 years plus. If I need a revision of certain document that has been translated 10 or 12 years ago, I can find it and only mark the changes that appear in the document. And again, we're saving money on retranslating what has been already provided to us. And I think I talked about one coordinating entity. I talked about interpreters being unionized, so it opened the venue of communicating directly with them, hearing their concerns, trying to work together, building partnerships, and agreeing on during the bargaining session, and then acting on the contract collective bargaining agreement on both sides adhering to what we bargained about. And of course, state procured contracts for communication materials in alternate formats. So what's next for Washington State? Only to improve. We just need to keep trying, right? Well, so whatever we're focusing on now, we're focusing on quality. That's very important for us. We're focusing on teamwork. We work together. We build community partnerships. We have several organizations that are now communicating with us directly, and it really helps to hold a hand on the pulse of what's going on. And of course, we want to be in compliant, so we're working on that. And we do it through training. And through all these efforts, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve equity. And again, our state is very, very committed to reaching that at every step of the services that we are providing, that people are getting equity horizontally and vertically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. Just 2 points I wanted to reflect on watching your, that was excellent. And I really feel like this is so helpful for the agencies out there just to see what's possible. And just since you've walked the walk, they can learn from you. So really grateful for you coming here and sharing. One thing I really liked what you said on one of your slides is it's never going to be perfect, but keep trying. And that reminds me of something I've heard once before that I think applies here is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think sometimes agencies and the planners, they get a little seized on this idea like, we're not doing it right, we're out of compliance and don't know how to do it, and then they just kind of freeze or they stick their head in the sand. And what I would want those agencies to do is just get started, just do some initial analysis, do some planning, and one slide that I would recommend you start with perhaps is the one about what type of language services to use, because you present in all those colors, you present some of the basic questions to take a look at. And so I would recommend that as like a blueprint starting point when you're revising or crafting your language access plans from the start. So thank you so much, Elena.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to come back home and we're going to move towards to Melody, and we're going to hear about the experience in our Hawaii State Judiciary. Thank you, Melody.
Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me? I tend to talk a little fast, so if I go really quickly and you can't, you want me to slow down, just wave at me. Okay, so my name is, oops. So I'll just get started because I really want to get you out of here on time. So my name is Melody Kubo. For those of you who don't know me, and I know many of you I've already met, I am with the Hawaii State Judiciary. In my day job, I am the Court Interpreter Services Coordinator, which means I am the manager of the Court Interpreting Program. Our office is a very, thank you, is a very small office. So we actually at the courts within the past, 5 to 7 years have ramped up our language access services. So we've gone from, barely from a minimal level, I would say, and today this year we were ranked #1 in the nation by the Justice Index. So we've spent a lot of time, a lot of resources, developing our plan and developing our services. So I thought I wanted to share some of what we've done with you in the hopes that you can take from this what will work in your agency and so that you know that it's not impossible to do. Okay. So like I said, I'm with the Office on Equality and Access to the Courts. We're very small. We have 5 staff on a good day. Right now we have 2. So we are very small staff with a very broad mission. We actually are part of administration. So my big boss is Rod Miley, the administrative director of the courts. Oops, what did I hit? Okay. Broke it. Okay, so what we do in our office as one of our main goals is to facilitate access to the courts for LEP populations, among others. So first thing we did was a needs assessment, and of course we're very lucky at the court in the sense that we have always provided court interpreters. So I have data on court interpreter expenditures, the languages we provide in, and that forms the basis of our needs assessment. And what we found is that the people who are coming through our courts are very different than the census data or the school age population, right? So, you know, like yesterday you've heard CJ and I think Justice McKenna talk about our top languages being Chuukese, Ilocano, Marshallese, Korean, and Spanish. But it differs by community. So on Oahu, our top languages are Chuukese, Korean, Ilocano, Vietnamese, and Marshallese. In Maui, their top language is Spanish. In Kauai, their top language is Ilocano. In Big Island, their top languages are Marshallese, Chuukese, and Spanish. And it depends if you're Hilo or Kona. In Kona, their top language is Spanish. But in Hilo, it's Chuukese. So we need to really know who your audience is, who are the people coming through your program, and how do they come through your program, and how often do they come through your program. Okay. So one thing we've done is we take advantage of planning tools. For example, our federal funder, the Department of Justice, issued specific planning tools for courts, prosecutorial agencies, and all federally funded or federally assisted programs that have guiding questions to help you work through the process. So we go through those questions periodically as a matter of continuing to assess how we're doing and where our continuing needs are. Okay. Then we developed a language access plan. So we're really fortunate in that our plan is not just a roadmap for us. It's also a self-assessment because we footnote what we have done in each area so that we can kind of see what we've done and where we need to go. Okay? And, you know, we're lucky also that OLA has required us to turn in the plan every 2 years because that gives us sort of a motivator to get it done. Okay, so then we had to develop language services. So beyond our court interpreters, really a while back, if you had come to the court and you weren't in court, you wouldn't even get an interpreter, right? So a while back, we only provided live in-person interpreters in criminal defense case for criminal defendants and defense witnesses, and only in court. So if you went outside the door and you needed to talk to your PD or you needed to go pay your ticket, you were kind of having to do that on your own. Okay, so one thing that I did want to say here is that a lot of these language services that we've developed very quickly, we developed in response to the Department of Justice investigation. So while it is true that it is not a fun thing, it's not fun at all, but if we looked at it as an opportunity to collaborate and to strengthen the areas that we knew were weak. And just from a program perspective, there was a time in our agency when anything prefaced by the words DOJ says was a good thing to do because it got you a prioritized, a major issue priority. So even though we didn't get everything we asked for, we got a lot of things that were bumped up the list because of DOJ says. Okay. So one thing I did want to say is that we continue to build our court interpreter program. So for those of you who are bilingual speakers in this audience and are not part of my court interpreter program, 15 seconds. Okay, consider coming to the court and becoming a court interpreter because we actually don't need any legal background. We will train you. Our workshops, we require our court interpreters to come to a 2-day workshop. We teach you about court, what you need to do in court, and court interpreter ethics. Those classes only happen once a year. They happen on every island, and it will be happening in February and March. So please come see our table, and we have flyers outside. Okay, end of the pitch. Okay. So like I said, a lot of what we have done in the past, a lot of our progress is stimulated by the DOJ, and not that we wouldn't have gotten there, but we might not have gotten there this quickly. Okay, I'm being really honest here. So what the DOJ did when they came into technical assistance review was they identified for us 5 areas that we needed to work on. which was our language access policy, how people access our services, our complaint system. They wanted us to look at how we assign court interpreters, and then accountability, okay? So one thing we immediately did, of course, was to ramp up our language access policy to make it extremely very clear that everybody who comes to court, whether you are a plaintiff, a defendant, a witness, a person with a substantial interest in a case, auntie of a minor who's living with you, all these people who need an interpreter will get an interpreter in court, okay? Our language policy now makes clear that anybody who comes to our counters or our windows, calls on the phone, wants to do business with the judiciary, has the right to language access, okay? So this is our statement of public corporate commitment, right, to providing our services with language access. Part of that commitment was the hanging of the welcome banner that we have in each courthouse. So we also have these we speak your language, right? Okay. So in terms of accessing, one of the things that we've done, for which we've also been recognized, is ramped up our website. Why is our website so important? I'm going to be honest. We've been told, and maybe you've been told, this is how federal agencies look at who they're going to investigate. They look at your website and see if you have materials on your language services. Do you have materials that tell people how to access those services? Or are they in language? So we didn't, 5 years ago, we really had nothing. So one thing that we have done is to make it very easy to find that information. Now that we have it, we have a language access tab. It's very easy to find everything that we have related to language services in one place from the home tab, okay? When you click on that, you immediately would get to our policy, a list of our services in English, the materials that we have available, okay? And if they're in translation, we tell them which languages those are, and it links to that document, okay? So we have, for example, information on, I can't even see that from here. No,
It says here, how to request an interpreter
thank
for a
you.
court hearing.
Okay, how to
And the
request
Spanish
an interpreter, information on how to request a sign language interpreter, information on how to use an interpreter, because we found that a lot of LEP people had never got an interpreter before, didn't know the role of the interpreter, okay? We have here, is it tips?
Yep, tips on
Tips
going
on
to
going
court.
to court, and then information on our self-help centers. So the information on how to request an interpreter, tips on going to court, and the self-help centers is actually one publication. What we did was break it out into separate sections so that, one, it looks like we have more resources, but also because we felt like that way people would better be able to see and go to the information that they would like to find valuable, okay? So for our LEP customers that we know they're not going to get to the language access tab, but what we did was create a sidebar on our homepage. It's actually on every page of our website. It has 14 of our high demand languages. You click on a language name, you will get immediately to a language specific page. So clicking on Chuquis will get you to Chuquis. And on each page, we have put every document that we currently have in translation in that language. Each of our translations is subtitled in English so that we all know what it says, but we try to update that page as we are able to produce more resources. Because in some languages, I'm going to be honest, you click on that language and you are going to get a statement that you're entitled to an interpreter for free and a language ID card. And pretty much in some languages, that may be all we have right now, but we thought it's better to start with a baby step rather than wait till we got a bunch of resources together. So some languages are very short. Some languages, Chuquis is one of our high demand languages, so we actually have a lot more resources in that language than in others. Yeah? Okay. One thing the Department of Justice really wanted us to do that we'd never had is a complaint system for language services. So in the courthouse, we had comment cards. Yeah, you could tell us how we're doing, and you could check language or court interpreters and give them a comment. I've heard that we had these cards. I don't know if they're still using them, but I've never seen them out. We also had a little feedback link on our website that would be for web-based kind of comments. We actually had changed that feedback link, and now we have a survey. So if you have comments about your court experience in any way, including your language access services, you can click on that link. It goes directly to our public affairs office, and then they filter it back to us. Okay? We now have a language access complaint form. It's in development. It is going to be posted online in 14 languages, and it will actually allow an LEP person or a public person, an attorney, advocate, family member, to communicate with the court directly about the provision of language access. If you didn't get an interpreter, if your interpreter spoke the wrong language or dialect, you can file this complaint form, and within 10 business days, you will get an answer from the court, because the goal of that complaint is to make sure that we're providing language access when you come to court, so the next time you come to court, you will have an appropriate interpreter. Okay? So that is actually, look for that coming soon. We're actually in translation, so hopefully within the next 6 months to a year, we'll be able to ramp that out. Yeah? Okay. And then the last thing that we did, which is really important, and I think was critical in how we got to be #1 in the nation, is training. Because you can write all the policies you want and have all the procedures you need, but if staff on the front line don't know what to do when that person comes up to their counter and shows them a language ID card, guess what happens? Nothing. So we wanted to do training to make sure our frontline people knew what they were doing, had the resources they needed to service, right? And also that they knew that this was a corporate priority. So one thing we did was we did staff training. We were never, prior to this, able to train off staff. We would do train the trainer staff or train the manager staff, and that's not as effective, to be honest, because most people would go back to their office and not really do it. So what we found was we needed to train every staff. And what we did was we pared down our training. So instead of talking about the law and the history and the policy reasons why, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we found staff don't really care about that stuff. They really want to know, okay, how do I tell if the person's LEP, and if they are, what do I do? So what we did was we developed a training. The front half of the training talks about how do you determine what an LEP person is. There's literally one slide on the law, and it's Uncle Sam saying, I want you to know there's a law. Okay, so that's all. The back half of the training, we talk about steps. The training binder for this 2-hour training is 25 pages long. It has 5 tabs. It's 5 steps. So we say tab 1, step 1. Okay? There's 2 pages under there, identify the language. So that staff have a resource when they go back from this training on exactly what they need to do their jobs, right? We actually, it hurt. It hurt a lot. I'm an attorney. We get paid by the word. So it hurt a lot to throw out all that stuff about policy and background and history. But staff have told us that's the most effective training we did. One of the other things that we did when we did training is we wanted them to, it's easy to say, you use the telephone interpreter, you call this number, you dial, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It's a lot harder to do it. So what we did was we actually did a secret shopper call. We cold called the telephone company. We came up with a scenario. We had a bilingual employee play the role of a bilingual public person, and we taped it. And then we transcribed it, and we used it as a training tool. So we actually played the clip during the training and say, this one is good. Why was it good? This one is bad. Why was this one bad? And we have them listen to a good one and a bad one, and they start to understand how that goes. Right? Familiarity means they're more comfortable when they have to actually use it. Okay? So we also did these beautiful bench cards. They're called bench cards, even though they're not judges. They're, I call it a cheat sheet. But what these are it's our opportunities. So on the front of the card, there are steps on how to provide language access in court. On the back of the card, it shows them the steps on how to provide language access out of the courtroom. There's contact numbers, there's, how do you dial the telephone interpreter? There's information. How do you make a conference call? There's information. Okay. These are actually, I'm really proud of these because they're pretty, but they are also coated with they're heavy-duty cardstock. They were coated with a UV-resistant, water-resistant coating so that staff can put it on their desk and refer to it. Okay. So another thing that we've done is ramp up our interpreter training. Because in Hawaii, we don't have a lot of interpreter training opportunity. The court has decided to seek outside funding to do that. So we do a lot of skills building training, ethics refresher training. This was a 3-day interpreter training for criminal court cases. We did it in Hilo. We were able to take this training to the neighbor islands for the very first time under grant funding from our federal government, DOJ, and the Attorney General's office. I mean, we trained 8 people in Kauai. We would never have been able to do that, absent getting outside funding for that. Okay. And the other thing that we do, of course, is we collaborate widely. We participate in groups. We talk to people. We partner on projects. We've done a lot of things that, in order to expand our reach, and to see what other people are doing, because a lot of times what you are doing is we're not in a vacuum, and this isn't rocket science. So a lot of times what we're doing, other people can use what they're doing, we can partner on. So we try very hard to build those relationships in our communities, as well as in our, among our peers and our colleagues, so that we can leverage the limited funding that we have available and make it go a lot farther. And that's all I have.
And sound effect. Yay. Thank you, Melody. That was excellent. One thing I really liked what you said was that you take baby steps. Mm-hmm. And if that's the attitude that OEAC took, like, well, we're not going to get it perfect, but we're going to take baby steps. I mean, look at where they're now. I mean, they're ranked #1 in the nation. They still, had to take the approach that they would take it one step at a time. We do baby steps, but something for example, translation. Once a document's translated, it's translated. It's done, right? You may change it, you may find things you want to fix about it. You may add to it, but the bulk of the work is done. The interpretation, for example, you're going to bring in an interpreter for one defendant, one client, and whatnot. And then next one comes along, and if you're going to cite translate a document for that person, cite translation meaning like an oral interpretation, then that's lost. That work, those resources kind of lost with that one client. But if it's translated, you can use that again and you repeat it. So anyways, I like what you said about the baby steps. And another thing that I like with your website, which I think everyone should look at as an example, something to strive towards because they've received accolades for their website. Pretty much any language that they encounter, there's something on their website that an LEP person will just be acknowledged. So even if the documents aren't fully translated, at least there's something to say, you have a right to an oral interpreter that's going to explain this to you. So you won't have very many people, unless it's a very obscure language, that are going to be completely lost. Right? And can you imagine, you just don't even have anywhere. But if I'm speaking, whatever Marshallese or whatever, and I have no idea what to do, if I find this link that says I have a right to interpreter free, how much will your anxiety be put to rest? Just knowing that they're thinking of you. So I think that's excellent.
And I did want to add that the one thing that we did make sure that we did was the language ID card for each language. Mm-hmm. So once they know they can get an interpreter, there's a tool that they can use to get the interpreter without even having to say anything in their broken English. They could just show the card and get a service. By the way, I forgot to mention, but my colleague is going to be outside. We do have language ID cards, and part of my grant funding was to give it out in the community. Mm-hmm. So if you are with an organization or you want to take some, we have language ID cards in 14 non-English languages that we see in the court, and we have a generic one in English. They can write in their language. and they can also use that for like deaf or hard of hearing or blind or what have you. And it's business-sized card, so they can keep it in their pocket. But if you think it might be useful to you, please feel free to take it in whichever languages you wish or all of them, because we really don't want to take it home.